Process of conscience formation. Well, you've got an excellent resource here from our Sunday Visitor. I'm not going to follow it exactly, but this is really good. I had a chance to read it over, and I hope you really spend some time with it. Just to restate a little bit, the bishop's role and the role of the Catholic Conference, because I represent the bishops, is to help people understand the principles of Catholic social teaching and then point out some possible political choices for you on issues so you can form your conscience and then take action on it and make decisions about how to get involved. And so I want to talk a little bit about that process, about how we make these decisions as a part of our prayer life and some principles for doing that. Conscience is not just about how we feel or what we might first think about something, all right? So I think the first principle is that we have to approach any decision with an openness to the truth. And so, and this is really hard, and I'm talking about myself now. We have to have that desire to say yes to God, wherever that leads us, not yes, but. And that is a difficult thing. And so we have to kind of put aside maybe what our initial inclination is and try to be open to what God might be saying to us in our prayer life. We have so many resources where we can find information from the church's perspective. Obviously, sacred scripture and church teaching is important. There's a lot of good documents out there that you could look at. There's I call it amazing document that's called the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church. It's a book this thick that covers basically all of those political issues that the church is interested in and what the church has had to say about that over time. And you have one, Betty? Yeah. So can you pull it out and show it? Yeah. This is, and so you ask about, well, what are fundamental things? Well, these are the things the bishops talk about as something that we should be interested in. Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. So that's a really good resource for us as we make our decisions, and we can help put that to our prayer life. But there's other things as well that we should take into account. Another thing we should take into the account is the experience of other people around us and what they've learned. Examples of parish ministries that, you've got a whole list here. These people know how to help people. So what can we learn from them that affects public policy? Discussions. What can we learn from them? Catholic Charities. If you look at Catholic Charities just as an example, they're the largest non-governmental social services agency in the country, if you put them all together. They have a great deal of knowledge about how we can help people directly through our charity. And then, of course, the flip side of justice, one is charity, one is action, advocacy. We need to have both. And so when I'm at the Capitol, this is a very important piece for me, is that I don't know everything, and in some cases I don't know anything. The information I get is from people that know a lot, and so I rely a lot on people from Catholic Charities and other charitable groups to inform what the bishops should know about different bills that relate to poor people. Catholic schools, those folks know a ton about education and what good education looks like, and so they inform our discussion about education policy at the Capitol. So we rely a lot on people that know what they're talking about. And a good portion of the time that we don't get involved in things is because we don't think we know much about it. And so I don't want to be up there talking about things that we don't know about, right? So there's a lot of good sources for information. Okay, we talked a little bit about facts and background. The one thing I really want to get across to you tonight is to look at a variety of sources, and particularly look at sources that might make you angry sometimes. Because if you're on social media much, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whatever, those algorithms are shaping your worldview. They're putting you in a bubble, and you're not seeing things that you might otherwise see. So I encourage you to look at different sources of information and don't just rely on social media, because there is truth to be found in what other people have to say, sometimes even if you don't agree with what they have to say. For sure, and don't take our word for it always. I mean, you need to do your own research on these things. It doesn't mean you need to be a policy expert. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying have an openness to looking at other things and seeing what you can find out. I would very skeptically look at political party talking points, because they're virtually always skewed one way or the other. It doesn't mean you can't learn from them and they don't have good information, but they're always coming from a particular perspective. So really encourage you to look at, other sources of information than maybe what you just see in your Facebook feed. And I'll give you more credit than that. But anyway, that's important. And then we put this information as part of our discernment process. In other words, how do we put this in our prayer life? And one thing that, as you probably have guessed already, that's really hard to do is to be silent and rely on the stillness in your heart to start speaking to you. And that's one of the things I really appreciate with the liturgy at some different churches, where they allow time for silence within the liturgy. That's really important. And even our friends at In the Bag Corporate Cuisine, if you've ever had that, they have little cards, little sayings in their bag. Last week it was learn the power of silence. Okay, so we're getting theology in our lunches, these days. Learn the power of silence. This is real. If I had to say one thing, I would say we need to really spend some time in silence. And it's hard to do because our phones have trained us otherwise. I know it's true for me, so it must be true for everybody else, right? But it's hard to pay attention, and we got to quiet down sometimes. And then maybe the most important thing is to actually then take action. And before we go tonight, we will have some time. I'll talk about a couple ideas, and I'll give you just a few minutes at the table to talk about some things. But we need to, once we have our discernment process, then we actually need to take that next step and do something about it. We don't want to just get inside our own heads. And I know many of you have already done that as well. So, before we move on, any questions about this process? You can only do the best job you can with it. You don't have to know everything about everything before you make a decision. You just need to do the best you can. You're all very busy people. You're crazy busy people, I know that. Just do the best you can. Some of you have already gotten involved in some issues, I'm sure, public policy things. I'd like you to just take a few minutes, and this will be maybe 5 minutes at your table, just to talk about this question. What will you do or have you done? If you have some experience in it, you might talk about it. To help those around you participate in public life, guided by the values of your faith. So if you would spend about 5 minutes to talk about this, and then we'll come back and share some of what you talked about, and then I've got a couple ideas of how you can be involved. Okay. Thank you for your discussion at the tables. And I'm going to ask you to share a little bit about what your discussion was. And then I've got 2 questions I know that I'm going to hit back on the question of prudential judgment and a question about the Catholic vote group. And I'll get to that before we're done. But when I start at this table, do you want to talk a little bit about what you discussed and if you have any things you want to share or questions?
Some of the things we discussed were the youth of our nation, how important they are, and to set a good example for them, give them the base that they need to become good people.
Yeah. So the concern is about young people and what we can do as a good example. That actually, I was doing a presentation last night, and the same thing came up in a different way, in that people are concerned, what can we really do to help families? And that's a tough question, because you're not really going to fix families, what's going on with families with the new law. There's a tiny little thing, like I'll give you an example of one thing that we've tried to do, and we'll probably try again, is for people who are getting married, we would have the law disregard the income of one spouse, so they might continue to receive basically the welfare benefit. So the idea would be is that we encourage people in that way at least to be married and help build a family, and they wouldn't lose all their benefits, and hopefully they can save a little for family. Now that's just a tiny little thing to do, but sometimes that's all you can work on. Anything else from you guys?
Well, in the conversation that we have with people, tells who we are.
Right. And what we're about. And I think that's one thing that, you know, politics can come off as pretty bad these days in terms of the discourse. There's probably an understatement, okay? We have this to bring to that conversation. And I could talk a lot more about that. But the words of Jesus Christ and these principles are something we have to offer for society, for sure. And we need to be talking about it as Catholics first. And we should do that if we're a Republican or if we're a Democrat, you know?
Or young,
And with young people.
yes. Because they're so interested in their,
Yeah. Yeah, video games. How about that table?
We talked about downsizing and decluttering and where to take stuff.
Oh, that's good.
St. Vincent de Paul. And then the Antioch sort of went through the list of things that you can get involved with here at St. Vincent.
Thank you. Well, you guys?
I don't know, should I give my perspective? Yeah, okay. I was looking at the question, I was looking so much on a bigger or a wider lens and everything as far as, you know, how can I relate to people at my own place of work who obviously do not share my own faith values.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of how you said at the beginning of the session about dignity of the human person. And I have to be willing to basically to take off the labels and everything as far as what I see that well, this person's not a Republican, it's not a Democrat, they're not black, they're not white, they're not male, they're not, well, they're either male or female, but
Right.
I've got to get into their own perspective, their own shoes as far as how they see things. And I have to be willing to understand where it is they're coming from.
Yeah.
And maybe in some ways, at least to form the relationship, and if I can at least form that relationship, then I can kind of guide them into participating in that public life.
Mm-hmm. That's a great insight. Thank you.
David can talk. He's the one that talked about it.
Okay.
Well, I live at Deerfield, which is an old folks home. And we have an issue there with turn. It's a hazardous turn. People have been hurt. Traffic goes about 50, 60 miles an hour. And so we were struggling with how to deal with it. And somebody said, well, you probably know Mary Kramer. She lives there.
Yes.
And charity and dignified conversations are key word. Anyway, she got the politicians to come visit, and we all told them how much we needed. And the answer was the same from each politician. Take 10 people to every city board meeting in Clive and Urbandale every week.
Yeah.
Well, the next week, they got together on their own.
Oh,
And they've announced the willingness to address this.
so you got together with your people and addressed an issue that was right in front of you in your neighborhood, and it looks like change is coming.
Yeah, well, ultimately, they're going to tear down the overpass on 3580.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to change.
Thank you for sharing that. How about you guys? And you don't have to if you don't want to. That's okay. So how many of you have actually contacted your legislator before, either in person or by email or on the phone or whatever? Wow, that's a really good number. I'm impressed by that. Usually it's not nearly that.
I wrote a letter to President Trump this week.
Oh, did you? Very good. And, it's hard to do that, Email is easy, easier. In person sometimes is harder. But we try to make it very easy for you to contact your legislator. And this will be about issues, you'll hear about it from us, obviously, but you can use these same methods to contact them about whatever you want. I mean, don't limit yourself to what the Catholic Conference is talking about, okay? So we'll give you a couple ways you could do that. So tonight on your smartphone, if you text the word Iowa Catholic to 50457, you'll get our action alerts on your phone. And that will be 4 or 5 texts a year. You'll get a text 4 or 5 times from us from January through May saying, hey, we have an action alert, look at it. So you're not going to be spammed. But anyway, you just text the word Iowa Catholic, one word, to 50457. We'd also encourage you to sign up for our legislative network. If you go to iowacatholicconference.org and click on Join the Network, you can give us your email. Now, if you gave us your email on the sheet, you don't have to do that. We'll put you on automatically. But you can do it on your own. And then you'll get our newsletter. And you'll also get our action alerts through email. And so what that means is this time of year, you might get a newsletter once a month or so. But during the legislative session, we send out a newsletter every week and tell you about what we're working on and how you might be able to get involved in things that you might be interested in. So that's just a way for you to hear about what we're working on if you're interested in hearing that. So I encourage you to do that. We'd love to have you do that, and you'll learn more about what the key issues are at the legislature. But this would be a good opportunity for me to go into a couple questions that we got, and one of those was about prudential judgment. So I think where you're headed with that is, let's say the Catholic bishops say, we think it's a good idea to raise the minimum wage. And you're a legislator and you say, well, we want people to do better. We need people to do better, but if we raise the minimum wage, people are going to lose jobs and it's going to raise prices. So I don't support that. So does that mean that they're going to be kicked out of the Catholic Church? And the answer is no. That's a judgment call that legislators have to make. They need to take what the church says very seriously, what the bishops say very seriously. But it's really, it is a thing of prudential judgment. But they better have a good answer of why they need to do that. So those are things like some basic issues that come up. The bishops are giving their best advice. And it's very rare that there's an absolute up or down issue that really, it's like you're putting your immortal soul in danger if you vote one way or the other. It's rare at the Capitol because the legislative leaders work to make it rare. They don't want to have up or down votes on anything, much less really important issues. And so usually legislators can find a reason for not voting for a particular item that may make some sense. But prudential judgment is not a get out of jail free card. Ultimately, it's about your salvation, right? So you need to be able to answer for those things as best you can. So I don't know if that answers your question, but not quite.
Is there a good example of something that would prudential judgment would not apply?
Very few. Even some that would seem obvious, like abortion, usually is not. Example would be the bishops were not super enthusiastic about the heartbeat bill that passed and then got struck down in court. And the reason for that, number one reason, is that it was well known it was going to be unconstitutional and it would not work, and it probably would be better spent doing other pro-life things. So you might say, well, if you voted no on that, that was a very bad thing for you to do. But there were some Republicans that voted no, and I think they probably had a good reason for it. So I'm just going to use that as an example. It's very, very rare, I would say, to have something that you would really, bishops would say, you shouldn't come to communion. So it's not what everybody wants to hear, I know, but I think that's the truth of it in terms of what the principles are and what you look at in the compendium and what their principles are. And then there was a question about Catholic Vote. There's a group called Catholic Vote. It's not an official church organization, but I would call it one of those organizations that, whereas, you know what I said earlier, the bishops very much want lay people to get involved in politics. And they want you to organize. And they want you to organize in a political party if you would like to do that. And Catholic Vote is one of those groups that's a group of lay Catholics who have organized around a couple particular issues and are interested in putting those issues forward. That's good. To the extent that any group, whether it's that group or another group, says this is what the bishops want, I'm a little nervous about that because usually that's not 100% the case. You should let the bishops talk for themselves and teach for the church and not have a group of other people who are speaking for the bishops out there. But they've done some good stuff. But my point is, we do want you to get involved, and that's one way to do it. Other questions? Yep, we're into question time. That's good. All right. Well, I really do encourage you to pay attention to what's going on around you and contacting legislators, particularly at the state level. You know, I know people are sometimes scared to do that, but most of the legislators get into that work because they like people and want to help them. So even if they disagree with you, you should not feel at all shy about emailing them and saying, you know, I'd like to take you out to coffee and talk about this. You know, because this is really important to me and I'm your constituent. And can you sit down and talk to me about this? And the vast majority of them will do that. And maybe you take one of your friends with you. And that's not a bad idea to have two people with you so you're all hearing the same thing. But definitely make that effort to reach out. If you're really interested about something, they need to hear from you. Because if they don't hear from you, they'll go their own way or be listening to other people, and they need to know that you're out there. So I think that's super important if you would do that. So anyway, I really appreciate your attention tonight. Appreciate the fact that you came out to listen, and I'll be here for a little bit afterwards. If you have any questions, find me, and or you can find my contact information on the website. So thank you very much.